We're getting engaged," the young woman declares happily across the counter, her eyes sparkling with joy and excitement. This is a high-end jewelry store that specializes in precious stones and breathtaking designs. I work here as a sales associate, helping customers find the perfect piece to symbolize their love and commitment. And the man standing next to the woman who just announced their engagement is none other than my husband, Mick. When we first met, I was instantly drawn to Mick's bright smile and reliable demeanor. He had a way of making me feel safe and cherished, and I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him. But about 6 months into our marriage, things started to change. Mick began taking more business trips and working late nights at the office. I tried to be understanding, telling myself that he was just working hard to provide for our future. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. And then, on this fateful day, my worst fears were confirmed. Mick walked into the very store where I was filling in for a colleague, arm in arm with a young woman I had never seen before. Even though it was just a coincidence, seeing Mick with another woman felt like a punch to the gut. My vision blurred and my heart raced as I tried to process what was happening. An engagement ring? What did this mean? In an instant, all the trust and love I had for Mick, all the happy memories we had shared, they all shattered into a million pieces right before my eyes.
"I'm so adored by him,"
the young woman, who I later learned was named Amos, gushed to me, completely oblivious to the fact that I was Mick's wife.
"He calls me multiple times a day, always picks me up and drops me off when we go out, and buys me anything I say I like. I'm so loved, I feel like the luckiest girl in the world."
As Amos went on and on about how wonderful Mick was, I couldn't help but think about all the times I had wondered why our savings weren't growing as fast as they should have been, given Mick's salary. Now I knew the answer: he had been lavishing his mistress with gifts and attention, all while neglecting his own wife. Mick, meanwhile, had finally noticed my presence and was shifting uncomfortably from foot to foot, his face twisted into a guilty grimace. Fighting back the urge to scream or cry or both, I somehow managed to plaster on my best customer service smile and speak in an overly cheerful voice.
"Is that so? Congratulations! If you're looking for a diamond engagement ring, we have some stunning new designs in this display case over here."
Then, I turned to look directly at Mick, my gaze unwavering as I continued.
"And for you, sir, I have a special recommendation."
When Mick saw what I was holding out to him, the color drained from his face, and his mouth began to tremble. I felt a bitter laugh bubbling up inside me, so different from the fake smile I had been forcing. Because what I had thrust in front of Mick's face was a divorce certificate application, already signed by yours truly.
"Just add your signature here, and our divorce will be finalized. Feel free to go and be happy with your little side piece."
My name is Lena, and I'm a 29-year-old woman working at a well-known jewelry store. The store where I work carries a wide variety of accessories, and the interior is always clean, bright, and glittering with promise. Customers come in searching for the perfect piece adorned with rubies, sapphires, pearls, opals, and more, each one hoping to find something that will make them feel special and loved. Whether they're shopping for an anniversary gift or a little treat for themselves, everyone's face lights up when they see our beautiful selection. But the one thing that outshines everything else in the store? The diamonds, of course. Delicately cut and set into stunning rings, they sparkle and shine from their prime location in the center of the showroom, drawing every eye with their timeless beauty and elegance. And of course, most of the customers who come in to buy these stunning pieces are couples in love or newlyweds, their eyes shining with anticipation and joy. Watching these happy duos choose their perfect symbol of commitment, make their purchase, and walk out hand in hand, their faces glowing with excitement, it's impossible not to feel a swell of vicarious happiness. Selling sparkle and bliss, that's what this job is all about. And I take great pride in what I do. As for my own love life, well, I've always been so captivated by the allure of working in a jewelry store that romance has taken a bit of a back seat. Day after day, I'd watch the lovers and spouses who came into the shop, feeling pangs of longing. But the more I threw myself into my work, the less time I seemed to have for putting myself out there and finding my own special someone. My friend Vanessa, noticing my perpetually single status, decided to take matters into her own hands and set me up with a guy she knew. That guy turned out to be Mick, my future husband. Mick was 6 years older than me and worked in the sales department of an electronics company. I was immediately drawn to his outgoing nature, his way with words, and his perpetually sunny disposition. But he also had a serious side, really listening intently when it came to important matters. After just a few dates, I knew with absolute certainty that if I were to marry anyone, it would be him. I made the first move and confessed my feelings, and we started officially dating. About 6 months into our relationship, I brought up the topic of marriage. These days, there's no shame in a woman taking the lead when it comes to tying the knot. I confidently and assertively moved our marriage talks forward. At first, Mick said it was too soon. But as I passionately made my case for why getting married and starting a family sooner rather than later was the way to go, he came around to the idea. It probably helped that a lot of people in Mick's circle were getting hitched around that time too.
Hearing everyone's stories made me realize I needed to really think seriously about marriage myself. And when I think about our future children, getting married to you now just makes the most sense,
he told me. From there, things progressed smoothly, meeting each other's families, making preparations. I had lost my mother to illness when I was too young to remember her, and had been raised by a single father. So when I brought home my husband-to-be, my dad Danny was so overjoyed that he cried until his eyes were red and puffy. "Lena, you've been through so much, growing up without a mother. I was happy enough just seeing you land your dream job and work so hard, but now you've found yourself such a wonderful husband too. I'm so glad I was able to raise you to this point," he said, choking up. Mick and I comforted Danny together, vowing silently to give him even more peace of mind from here on out. Mick's parents were lovely people too, and I hit it off with them right away. My mother-in-law Juliet was so moved by the fact that I worked in a jewelry store. She asked me all about my job and the gems we sold, and I was more than happy to chat with her about it all. The conversation flowed effortlessly. Juliet listened with such empathy as I opened up about my upbringing too. "I think I've gotten the hang of most household tasks, but it's probably just the bare minimum for my dad and I to get by. I'm a bit nervous that there might be a lot I'm lacking when it comes to supporting Mick," I confessed. Juliet just laughed.
"You've worked so hard to get to where you are. That's more than enough. And if there's ever anything you're unsure about, just ask me,"
she said. Throughout our engagement and into our married life, Juliet was always there for me, patiently teaching me the ins and outs of managing a household. When it came to cooking especially, I learned so much from her. How to make a flavorful broth, the best ways to store ingredients, the secrets to a hearty, comforting stew, tips for bringing out the savory goodness in a roasted turkey. And never once did Juliet look down on me or make me feel foolish for the things I didn't know. She always explained everything with such kindness and care. Before I knew it, I had grown to adore her, to trust her like the mother I'd never had. Mick's job in sales kept him busy, but he had a strict policy of not bringing work home. He never did overtime from the house or went out with colleagues on his days off. Thanks to that, whenever Mick was home, he was able to devote his time and attention fully to me. Even after we got married, Mick and I remained as close as ever, chatting and laughing over meals, going on weekend drives and movie dates. He never once complained about my struggles with household chores. In fact, he would even praise the dishes I made while practicing Juliet's recipes. Of course, there were times when things got hectic at work and he'd have to stay late at the office or go on overnight business trips. But having watched my dad work tirelessly to raise me on his own, I actually found Mick's dedication to his job rather reassuring. As much as I missed him, I was more than happy to cheer him on. I had continued working after we married too, and there was something deeply fulfilling about being a couple who both took pride in our careers. It wasn't until about 6 months into our marriage that I started to feel the first stirrings of unease. Mick's job was as demanding as ever, but gradually, his business trips and late nights began to increase in frequency. It used to be that he'd only have to put in extra hours around the end of the month, and overnight trips were limited to once or twice in that same time frame. But now, regardless of the time of month, he was coming home late more often than not, and his travel seemed to have doubled. Thinking there must be some reason for the uptick in his busyness, I asked Mick about it casually, not wanting to read into things.
There's a chance I might be up for a promotion soon. And if I want to make that happen, I need to be delivering bigger results than ever before. Now's the time to really buckle down and prove myself,
he explained. It was a story I'd heard plenty of times before, putting in the extra effort at work when a raise or promotion was on the line. And as his wife, of course I was thrilled at the prospect of Mick advancing in his career. I told him as much, assuring him I completely understood and that I'd be rooting for him to clinch that promotion. I even mentioned it to Juliet during one of our regular phone chats. Her response gave me a moment's pause. That boy, for better or worse, isn't really the type to push himself too hard at work, she mused, sounding a bit perplexed. In the end, we both agreed that hopefully things would settle down for him sooner rather than later, and left it at that. But as the next month rolled around with no word of a promotion, I started to worry. I didn't want to nag Mick or make him feel like I was pressuring him about moving up in the company. I was working too, after all, and the last thing I wanted was to come across as some kind of money-grubbing leech. But by that point, Mick was spending nearly every week away from home, and even on the weekdays he was back, he was consistently getting in well past midnight. It felt like he'd all but stopped making time for our marriage. Needless to say, the baby we'd been planning for had yet to make an appearance. We could barely even find a moment to be together as husband and wife, let alone start a family. Is this busy period at work going to last much longer? I'm worried all this overtime might take a toll on your health, I ventured, trying to keep my tone light and casual. Mick barely glanced up from his phone, his fingers tapping away at the screen as he replied distractedly. Yeah, it's probably going to be like this for a while. Our department's been told to really step it up, so we don't get left in the dust by the others. I watched him, waiting for more, but he just kept his eyes glued to that damn device. After a few minutes, he finally pocketed it and turned to me, his voice brusque and businesslike, as if our earlier conversation had never happened.
By the way, I've got another business trip next week. I'll be gone, so just do whatever. Wait, another trip? Which days? I asked, trying to mask the sinking feeling in my gut. Thursday through Saturday, 3 days. Don't worry about the house or anything. Anyway, see ya.
And with that, Mick turned his back on me and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with my swirling thoughts. It was true that even when work got hectic, Mick never really complained or expressed dissatisfaction about our home life. There was a stretch when I was so swamped at the store that I let the cleaning slide, but he didn't say a word about it. I used to think that was a sign of his kindness, his understanding. But now, I could see it for what it really was. Not love or compassion, but pure, simple neglect. Did I even matter to Mick at all anymore? How had we gotten to this point? And then there was the thing I hadn't managed to tell him before he walked away. My job required the occasional business trip too, rare as they were. The store I worked for was a nationwide chain, which meant that sometimes, I had to fill in at other locations when they were short-staffed. Usually, it was just the shops in our immediate area trading employees back and forth. But this time, they were in such a bind that I was being sent to a store nearly 2 hours away by car. And as luck would have it, my trip coincided exactly with the dates of Mick's upcoming travel. Given how little he seemed to care about our household these days, I doubted he'd have any objections to me being gone and unable to take care of things. But more than that, there was something about this particular set of trips that left me feeling uneasy. I picked up my phone and fired off a quick message to a certain someone. Their reply came through almost immediately, so I decided to follow up with a call. Then, the next week arrived. I saw Mick off as he left for his alleged business trip, and then promptly set out on my own journey. After a long couple of hours on the road, I was already tired by the time I pulled into the parking lot of my destination store. But work beckoned, so I steeled myself and headed inside. As soon as I entered, a woman caught my eye and waved me over. I waved back, a genuine smile breaking through my exhaustion as I hurried to join her. She worked at this particular branch. We'd actually started at the company around the same time and had gone through training together. Her name was Vanessa. When I found out I'd be traveling here, I'd reached out to see if we might be on the same shift. And on the very day Mick had informed me of his own upcoming trip, it was Vanessa I'd called up to discuss a hunch that had been nagging at the back of my mind. Vanessa wasn't just a colleague, she was a true confidant, the kind of irreplaceable best friend you could turn to for advice and heart-to-hearts about anything and everything.
"Thank you so much for making the trip out here,"
she said, her warm smile radiating genuine affection. "Of course. I'm so happy we get to work together. Here's to the next 3 days." I grinned back, feeling a surge of gratitude for her steadfast presence in my life. With our little reunion complete, we both set about tackling our respective tasks for the day. Since we worked for the same brand, the day-to-day operations were pretty much identical from store to store. Whenever I hit a snag or had a question, Vanessa was right there to guide me through it, and I soon found myself settling into a comfortable rhythm. It was early afternoon when it happened. I was holed up in the employee lounge, plugging away at some paperwork, when I heard the electronic chime that signaled a new customer had entered the store. Out on the sales floor, I could hear Vanessa's muffled voice as she greeted the newcomer with a polite,
"Welcome to our store, sir. How may I assist you today?"
Call it force of habit, but I found myself rising from my chair and edging closer to the door, curious to catch a glimpse of our latest patron. As I peered out from my hidden vantage point, I felt the blood drain from my face, my breath catching in my throat. Because there, standing mere feet away from my unsuspecting best friend, was none other than my very own husband, Mick. What in the world was he doing here? It was the middle of the day, shouldn't he be at work? No. It couldn't be. There was no way his business trip just happened to coincide with my own in both timing and destination. And yet, the proof was right there in front of me, clear as day. The man standing in the middle of that showroom, looking entirely too casual and carefree to be on the clock, was undoubtedly my spouse. But if he wasn't here for work, then what exactly was he up to? I was just about to step out and confront him directly when the chime sounded again, heralding the arrival of another customer. A young woman, probably in her early 20s at most, came bounding into the store with a giddy smile, making a beeline straight for Mick.
"Hey, no fair going in without me."
The young woman, oblivious to Mick's frozen state, looped her arm through his, pressing herself against him with a familiarity that made my stomach churn. She chattered away, her words lost to me as I stood there, rooted to the spot, my mind reeling. What the hell was happening right now? Who was this girl, this brazen hussy, clinging to my husband like she owned him? Vanessa, my best friend, the one who had been there on my wedding day. There was no way she didn't recognize the man who had just walked into our store. The man who was supposed to be my loving, faithful partner. As if sensing my turmoil, Vanessa glanced back towards the employee lounge where I stood hidden, her eyes meeting mine with a look of profound understanding and sympathy. She gave me a subtle nod, a silent promise that she had my back, no matter what. I nodded in return, my heart hammering against my ribs as I braced myself for whatever fresh hell was about to unfold. Without missing a beat, Vanessa turned back to the oblivious couple, her customer service smile firmly in place as she addressed them in a voice that was just a touch too bright to be entirely natural.
Is there anything specific I can help you find today?
I pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear every word of the impending interaction, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I fought to maintain my composure. We're looking for a diamond ring. The girl's high-pitched voice rang out, setting my teeth on edge with its grating sweetness.
Of course. We have some stunning new designs in this display case over here. Or if you prefer something more classic and understated, these styles are always very popular with our customers.
Vanessa's tone was polite but distant as she walked them through their options, ever the consummate professional.
Is this for a special occasion?
She asked, her words carefully neutral. And then, the answer that shattered my world into a million jagged pieces. Yes, it's for our engagement. We're looking for the perfect ring to symbolize our love. In that moment, it felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving me gasping and dizzy. I staggered back, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle the sob that threatened to tear itself from my throat. What did she just say? An engagement ring? But the man standing next to her, the man she was looking to pledge her life to, that was Mick. My husband. The jewelry shop is a place that delivers happiness to customers along with the brilliance of gemstones. And yet, in such a place of happiness, my happiness was shattered. My heart starts racing. Though my head feels like it's burning hot, my heart is growing increasingly cold, as if it's freezing. With trembling hands, I reach out across the office table. There, something was placed.
Oh my, are you two getting engaged?
Yes. As soon as possible, right, honey? The woman's voice rang out, seeking Mick's agreement. But no response came from him. I struggled to breathe, my chest tight with pain. Steeling myself, I straightened my spine and stepped back out onto the sales floor.
Welcome. I see you're looking for a diamond ring,
I said, putting on my brightest smile as I approached the couple. Mick's eyes widened in shock at my sudden appearance, his face turning a sickly shade of pale as he began to tremble. That's right. The latest designs are so cute, but something classic might be better for long-term wear. It's a tough choice. His mistress chattered away, her smile blissfully unaware that she was face to face with the wife of the man beside her.
I understand. It's an important decision, so please take your time and consider carefully. We have some catalogs here for you to browse as well.
I handed them a selection of jewelry catalogs, my customer service mask firmly in place. Then, I turned to Mick.
And for you, sir, I have a special recommendation.
The moment he saw what I was holding out to him, Mick's eyes bulged even further, his unfocused gaze darting nervously to my face. I met his panicked stare head-on, my practiced smile unwavering. Because what I had handed my husband was a divorce application, already signed by yours truly. A while back, when Mick's overtime and business trips first started to increase, I had reached out to Juliet with my concerns. Not long after, Juliet happened to be grabbing a bite near Mick's office when she spotted him slipping off into the night with a young woman on his arm. Of course, she immediately reported back to me.
It was a busy restaurant, so he might not have noticed me there. But because you had just mentioned your worries about him, I guess I was unconsciously on the lookout. That's the only reason I managed to catch him in the act.
So Mick's affair had been blown wide open, at least to Juliet and myself. On top of that, as his promises of a promotion grew more and more vague while his absences from home only increased, I had hired a private investigator to look into his activities. Juliet's testimony was credible, but at the time, we didn't have concrete proof that Mick and this mystery woman were actually involved in anything untoward. The results of the PI's investigation came to light sooner than I expected. Probably because Mick's cheating was so blatant, so shameless, that it only took a professional a few days to uncover the truth. Nearly every day, Mick could be seen whining and dining with his mistress in the bustling entertainment district near his office, before sneaking off to a hotel. And at least once a week, they would spend the entire night together. Within 2 weeks, I had a stack of damning photographs. His partner in infidelity was a woman named Amos. The same Amos who was currently simpering at my sales counter, picking out an engagement ring with my husband. And at the very same time I had hired the PI, I was also confiding in Vanessa, my coworker who was out on the floor with the duplicitous couple at this very moment. I so badly wanted to believe in Mick, the man I loved with all my heart. Vanessa had initially been supportive of that desire, doing her best to soothe my worries. But everything changed when the results from the private investigator came in. I sobbed into the phone, shocked to my core, as Vanessa tried to comfort me even as she made no attempt to hide her fury towards Mick.
Cheating on you with some mistress, that's the lowest of the low. And barely coming home anymore? It's like he doesn't care about you at all, Lena. I can't stand seeing you suffer like this.
Thank you, Ness. Hey, in a situation like this, do you think it's better to just get a divorce?
My heart felt like it was being ripped in two as I posed the question. Vanessa was silent for a moment before replying slowly.
It's your life, your decision. I don't want to push you into anything. But if you're asking for my honest opinion, I think you should leave him, Lena. You're a gorgeous, talented, and amazing woman. You could find someone so much better in a heartbeat.
You really think so?
Thank you for listening, and for being there for me.
Vanessa had reassured me then that we would get together soon for a long heart-to-heart. And as luck would have it, not long after, I was assigned to help out at her store for a few days. Since Mick never told me where his supposed business trips were taking him, running into him here had been a complete coincidence. But it seemed my best friend had been looking out for me, because somehow, she had gotten her hands on divorce papers. During our lunch break, Vanessa had handed me the documents with an apologetic smile.
I'm so sorry for jumping the gun like this. I know getting divorced is a huge, scary step. It has to be your choice, Lena. I just wanted you to have these, in case you ever felt ready to use them.
Even after learning of Mick's infidelity, I hadn't been able to bring myself to initiate a divorce. I had married him with such dreams of a perfect future together. Vanessa must have sensed my hesitation and taken it upon herself to get the paperwork in order, giving me the power to make the final call. I never would have guessed I'd be using those papers so soon. But seeing Mick with Amos, watching their betrayal play out right in front of me, it had crystallized my resolve. So while Vanessa kept the duplicitous pair distracted, I had hastily scrawled my signature on the divorce application and strode out to confront my cheating husband head-on.
What the hell is this?
Mick stammered, his face draining of color as he began to tremble. He was wearing a suit I had picked out for him, his hair styled to perfection. All for Amos. The sight of it made my skin crawl with revulsion. But I kept my customer service smile firmly in place as I addressed him.
Is there something about this particular item that interests you, sir? I'd be more than happy to discuss the details with you in private. Right this way, please.
And with that, I ushered Mick and Amos into the back office. Mick was visibly uneasy, his head bowed and his steps heavy as he followed me. Amos, on the other hand, seemed blissfully unaware of the situation, her brow furrowed in confusion even as a smile played on her lips. I gestured for them to take a seat, then fixed Mick with a steely gaze.
Who is this woman? And what's this about an engagement ring? I've had my suspicions about your recent behavior, but I never thought I'd stumble upon such blatant evidence of your cheating. Well, this clinches it. I need you to sign these papers, Mick.
I was no longer wearing the mask of a smiling saleswoman, but the face of a wife confronting her husband's infidelity. Mick shook his head vehemently, his lips trembling.
What the hell are you talking about? Divorce papers? I just happened to stop by this store for work. This woman is just a colleague here on business. Accusing me of cheating based on that? You're way out of line.
His composure slipping, Mick tried to cover his tracks with angry bluster.
I'm not out of line at all. I have even more evidence of your affair with Amos.
I started to retort, but Amos cut me off.
Wait, are you his wife? Oh my God, what a crazy coincidence. Wow, you look kind of old and tired, huh?
Amos flashed me a smug grin, clearly relishing the chance to throw me off balance as she prattled on.
I know this must sting, but we're seriously so in love. He calls and texts me constantly, always picks me up and drops me off when we go out, buys me anything I even hint at wanting. I'm totally spoiled rotten. He worships the ground I walk on.
She gushed about how adored she was, her voice dripping with self-satisfaction. I could only glare at her in disgust and disbelief. Mick shifted uncomfortably, his expression strained.
You know how men only truly adore one woman in their whole life? Obviously, he's going to choose a young, sweet thing like me over some near-30 hag. Wait, just wait a minute.
Mick interrupted his gloating mistress, his voice raised.
Lena, hang on, she's got it all wrong. She's just a junior colleague, tagging along for sales calls, that's it.
I met his desperate excuses with cool detachment.
Is it normal for your job to involve taking new hires to jewelry stores on sales runs?
Mick sputtered, at a loss for words. He might think I was hitting below the belt, but I was only stating the obvious. His brow furrowed, his face crumpling as if he might cry. But his wounded act only fueled my anger. I was the one who deserved to be in tears right now.
It was a momentary lapse in judgment. She's a new hire, so naive and cute. But I swear, it ends now. Marriage is completely off the table. Please, I'm begging you, forgive me.
Mick braced his hands on the desk and bowed his head in a deep, pleading apology. Amos's eyes went wide with shock.
What? What are you saying? You told me you were going to divorce her and marry me. You shut your mouth.
Mick snapped at her, making her flinch back in fear. I watched their back and forth, my expression unchanging as I shook my head.
Trying to backpedal now is pointless. I can't trust a word you say. And even if you did end things with Amos, the fact remains that you've been neglecting our marriage to carry on this affair for who knows how long. I can't stay with you after that. Let's get divorced today. Go on, sign the papers. Now. You can't expect me to just sign something like that out of the blue. Why are you two even fighting? Mick says he loves me the most.
Mick refused to sign, and Amos chimed in once again.
Let me make this crystal clear. I have evidence of all your indiscretions from a private investigator, and Juliet knows everything too. Don't think you can wriggle your way out of this. Divorce is your only option. If you won't sign, I'll take you to court.
With that, I folded the divorce papers and shoved them forcefully into Mick's pocket. Seizing the opportunity, Mick grabbed my arm in a vice-like grip.
Don't do anything crazy. I said I'll make things right, that I'm breaking it off with her. You're hurting me, let go. And stop making a scene in the store.
As we grappled, Amos inserted herself into the fray once more.
Why are you leaving me? What's so great about your old hag of a wife?
1 minute he was piling on the excuses, the next he was petulantly refusing to divorce. And every time we tried to talk, Amos would interrupt to brag about her relationship with Mick. Nothing we said seemed to get through to either of them. Seeing me at my wit's end, Vanessa picked up the store phone. She quickly called security, probably sensing the danger as Mick put his hands on me. Within minutes, both Mick and his mistress were being dragged out of the store by security guards. Mick looked disgruntled to the very end, but he had brought this on himself with his cheating. It was all his own fault.
That was rough. But you were so brave, standing up for yourself and declaring you want a divorce.
Inside the store, which had regained its former peace and quiet, Vanessa smiled at me.
No, in the end, I'm partly to blame for causing a disturbance. I'm sorry for the trouble I've caused the store. And thank you for having those divorce papers ready. I've been carrying them around because I was worried about you. The choice is yours, but
I just want you to be happier." Nodding, I felt tears spring to my eyes. I had a best friend rooting for me. Juliet and my own father were watching over me too. I resolved then and there that I wouldn't let this break me, that I'd find happiness on my own terms. And when I returned home after finishing my stint at the other store, it seemed Mick had beaten me there. His shoes and coat were in the entryway. Just seeing them was enough to fill me with a chill of pure loathing.
Look, I mean it. I'm done with that girl. So please, reconsider the divorce.
Mick was waiting for me in the living room, groveling with deep apologies. But no amount of bowing and scraping now could undo his repeated betrayals. Besides, Vanessa had once told me that cheaters never really change their ways. Even if I called off the divorce because of his desperate pleas, who's to say he wouldn't do the same thing again down the line? I was done being deceived.
All this time, you've been lying about work to go see Amos.
I said it coldly, then retrieved the photos I'd gotten from the PI, laying them out in front of Mick. His face twisted with chagrin.
After everything you've done, do you have any idea how much you've hurt me? I can't trust you anymore, Mick. I think it's time we went our separate ways.
Then I asked Mick if he'd signed the divorce papers. Like a kid reluctantly showing a test he wanted to hide, he pulled out the documents with a crestfallen expression. There was his signature, plain as day.
I signed, but are you really going to file them?
I pasted on the customer service smile I'd perfected at work.
Thank you for signing. I'll be packing my things and submitting these. Thanks for everything. Goodbye.
Turning my back on Mick's devastated face, I took the signed divorce papers and faced forward. And true to my word, I packed up my belongings that very day, filed the papers, and went back to my childhood home. When he heard what had happened, Danny was furious and heartbroken. But he comforted me and welcomed me back with open arms.
I'm so sorry about that no-good husband of yours. But Lena, you've worked so hard. I'm sure you'll find someone better. As long as you can grab hold of happiness in your own way, that's all that matters to me.
With tears welling up at Danny's overwhelming love, I nodded. The divorce alone wasn't enough to quell the turmoil in my heart. So I dipped into my savings and consulted a lawyer who specialized in divorce cases, deciding to sue Mick and Amos for alimony. With the evidence from the PI, the process went smoothly. I was able to send each of them a certified letter demanding $50,000 in divorce settlements. Naturally, Mick called to protest over and over. But I stood firm, insisting that it was a legally binding claim and I had no intention of backing down. I would absolutely make them pay up. After that, I stayed with my dad for a while as I put in a transfer request at work. As soon as I had a position lined up at another store, I moved out on my own. Living alone, I slowly began to reclaim my peaceful life. Vanessa reached out soon after everything went down, checking in to see how I was doing. When I told her I'd gotten divorced, she sounded relieved and wished me all the success and happiness in the world. Well, fast forward 3 months. One night, as I got home from work, my cell phone suddenly rang. I checked the screen and saw Mick's name. What on earth could he want at this point? I stared at the screen for a while, debating whether to ignore the call. But when it just kept ringing and ringing, I finally gave in and answered.
Hey, you have to do something. At this rate, I won't be able to keep my job. Hell, I won't even be able to survive.
Mick's voice was on the verge of tears as he launched into a rambling tirade. It seemed that after the alimony payments and the credit card bills he'd let pile up, his debt had ballooned out of control. And now that he couldn't lavish gifts on Amos like before, she'd apparently given up on him too. To make matters worse, because Amos was his junior at the company, the whole office had witnessed his pathetic display when I confronted him with the divorce papers. And once Amos realized Mick was broke, she turned on him, spreading all kinds of rumors around work. Like I went on a sales call with him to learn the ropes and he forcibly dragged me to a hotel, or I heard he's been hitting on every new female hire he can get his hands on. Thanks to that, He was constantly getting dirty looks from his coworkers. Forget a promotion, he was about to be stripped of the accounts he'd been managing. It was no surprise Mick was strapped for cash. The truth was, even though Mick was just a regular salesman, I actually made more than him working at the jewelry store. After we got married, we split the living expenses 50-50ths. But big purchases like furniture or the cost of the wedding itself came out of my savings, or Danny would chip in because he wanted to support us. Still, if he'd budgeted carefully, Mick should have been able to build up some savings of his own. But he had a weakness for women and a spending problem, always buying Amos designer bags and jewelry on a whim. When that wasn't enough, he started supplementing with credit cards. But he couldn't keep up with the payments. Throw in the alimony from the divorce settlement, and his debt just kept growing. As for the nasty rumors, I felt a little bad, but there was no denying he had a thing for younger women. Thinking back, when we first met, I was the youngest one at the mixer that night. And I remember when a new batch of recruits joined the company, mostly young girls in the sales department, he mentioned it to me with a telltale slackness in his cheeks.
My debt keeps piling up and I can't pay it off. Plus I've got creditors hounding me for the divorce settlement. At this rate, I'll be drowning in the stuff. Everyone at work knows about the affair and the promotion is off the table. I'm finished. And you're telling me this why, exactly? The alimony has already been decided, so you need to pay up, even if it's bit by bit. As for the rest, isn't it your own fault for chasing after young women even after you got married?
I shut down Mick's blubbering firmly.
Don't be so cold. We were husband and wife once. Help me out here. Lend me some cash, even a little, or introduce me to a new job, something please.
I was so flabbergasted by his selfish, self-serving demands that I had to laugh. Where did he get off asking me for favors after everything he'd done?
You mean the marriage you single-handedly destroyed? There's honestly nothing I can do for you, so you'll have to handle it yourself.
With that, I ended the call. What the hell was that about? No matter what he said, I couldn't muster up an ounce of sympathy for Mick. Exhausted, I collapsed onto the bed and fell asleep before I knew it. A few weeks after that whole debacle, I was working at the store as usual when the door chimed open. I greeted the customer with my standard welcome, bowing my head. But the instant I looked up, I froze in shock. The person marching straight towards me with purposeful strides was none other than Amos, the woman I'd met once before. Her hair was beautifully styled, no doubt the result of expensive salon treatments. Her makeup was the trendy natural look that actually took a lot of effort to achieve. And if I looked closely, she might have had a bit of plastic surgery done. Slung brazenly over her shoulder was the latest bag from a famous designer brand. There was no way she could afford all that on an entry-level salary. I'd bet anything she was blowing the money and gifts she'd wheedled out of Mick on her appearance. The cloying scent of Amos's perfume wafted all the way to the counter. Her lips pressed into a thin line, she narrowed her eyes so viciously it ruined her youthful beauty, glaring at me with pure ugliness. Then she slammed her hand down on the counter and got right up in my face.
Lena, how could you do this to me? My happiness is in shambles because of your selfish actions.
I blinked hard, not understanding what she was talking about. How had Amos even figured out which store I was working at now? Had she been going around to every branch of the same brand, trying to track me down? If so, her tenacity sent a chill down my spine.
Ever since he ran into you that day, Mick stopped loving me. He used to spoil me rotten, give me anything I wanted. I'm not sure what you're referring to. And please keep your voice down in the store.
Ignoring my attempts to calm her, Amos cut me off and kept right on causing a scene.
And nobody told me he'd be broke if you divorced him. I wanted him to leave his wife for me and marry me instead, because he was loaded and treated me like a princess. This is the worst. And why are you demanding alimony from me too? I just wanted to be loved and happy. You've completely ruined my life.
Amos's shrill, hysterical screaming echoed through the store. Other employees started emerging from the back, and passersby began to gather around as well. This kind of disturbance could seriously damage the store's reputation. I had to do something. But before I could frantically formulate a plan, Amos's hand shot out. She lunged across the counter, trying to grab me.
You! If you just stayed out of the picture from the start, I could have been pampered and adored and blissfully happy forever.
Amos continued to wail and sob. After that, one of the employees ducked into the back room, and it wasn't long before the police arrived on the scene. They promptly took Amos into custody.
Let me go! You're trying to make me out to be some kind of criminal?
There's suspicion of interfering with business operations, but we'll get your full statement later,
the officers said calmly as they surrounded Amos and dragged her out of the store. Honestly, the nerve of causing not one but two disturbances in my workplace. It was more than I could stand. I apologized profusely to my coworkers for the trouble I'd caused the store, and thanked the person who'd called the police from the bottom of my heart. Of course, they couldn't just let it slide, so a few days later I had to go explain the situation to the higher-ups at corporate. Mick's affair, Amos's outburst, it was all so humiliating to talk about, but this was part of being a responsible adult. In the end, my only punishment was a warning to reaffirm my commitment as a store manager. No concrete penalties. I vowed to buckle down and throw myself into my work with renewed focus. That momentary commotion didn't put a major dent in our sales, and the days passed smoothly. The store was filled with a rainbow of gems, as always: emeralds, topazes, rose quartz, garnets, and the customers who came to purchase them wore the same blissfully happy expressions as ever. It really drove home for me that a jewelry store should be a place of joy. As for Amos, who had caused such a scene, she was questioned by the police afterward. She managed to dodge the charges of interfering with business, but they ended up grilling her about the affair. Word got back to the company via the police that she'd been involved with Mick despite knowing he was married. And she'd tried to cover that up while spreading nasty rumors about him. Now it was her turn to be the office pariah. She was subjected to all kinds of bullying from older women with fearsome reputations, and the rest of her coworkers gave her the cold shoulder. The stress led to mistakes and subpar work. 2 months later, she more or less stopped coming in altogether. A quiet resignation of sorts. As for Mick, even though Amos came out of it worse, the fact remained that he'd cheated. He was still persona non grata at the office. But even with a pay cut, he had to keep earning somehow. So he clung desperately to his position. Then, a few months later, his ballooning debt had him backed into a corner. In a moment of weakness, or maybe temptation from the devil himself, he dipped into company funds. Of course, it came out and caused a huge scandal. He was fired on the spot. He went running back to his parents in tears, but Juliet had already heard the whole story from me. She was livid. And of course his father wanted nothing to do with him either. They told him there was nothing left to say and cut him off without hesitation.
We raised you better than to chase some young floozy when you had a good wife at home. You're no son of mine. Don't ever darken our door again.
Juliet reportedly shouted that at him as she tossed him out the front door. I don't know what happened after that, but I never heard about him landing a new job at the same level as his old company. Last I heard, he was scraping by with part-time work while slowly paying off his debts and divorce settlement. But his own living expenses are more than he can handle. It's only a matter of time before it all comes crashing down. As for Juliet, who disowned Mick, she and I actually still keep in touch. Our bond is so strong now, we don't need him as a go-between anymore. I still drop by from time to time for cooking lessons. I'm single again these days, but it's fun to make myself tasty meals. And even more fun to share them with Juliet. Like a pair of gal pals with a bit of an age gap, she and I will keep on getting along famously.
Thank you for your purchase. Wishing you every happiness.
I called out to a customer with a beaming smile as I saw them off at the counter. Today, yet another starry-eyed couple had left with a diamond engagement ring. They looked so blissful walking out arm in arm, I couldn't help but grin myself. My own experiences aside, I never resent the lovebirds and spouses who come into the store. I always want to sincerely celebrate their desire to enshrine their precious feelings in a glittering gem, to carry that promise into their future together. And each time, I'm reminded that this job is my true calling. Now that I've built up a solid track record working in the store, I've been tapped to take on buying trips to Los Angeles and New York. The allure of jewels is endlessly deep, and I'm determined to pour myself into this work with pride from here on out.
Hey, how much of Ben's inheritance am I gonna get?
My husband David blurts out, his words dripping with greed. My only family, my father, had just passed away suddenly, and we had barely finished the funeral. As I was drowning in grief, David didn't offer any comfort and nonchalantly started talking about money. My dad was a famous lawyer who often appeared in the media, and his earnings must have been quite substantial. When David and I first got married, we got along well and he never showed any desire for my father's status or wealth. But within a few months, he started acting strange. He stopped doing household chores, slacked off at work causing his performance reviews to drop, and went out drinking every night only to show up hungover at the office. Eventually, he became so self-indulgent that he had no qualms about being absent from work without notice. I suppose he had grown complacent, relying on my father's money. And now that my father had passed away, he finally revealed his true colors. His attitude, trampling on my loneliness and feelings of mourning for the deceased, filled me with a sadness that made me want to scream and cry, and an anger that welled up from the depths of my stomach at the same time. Lying on the bed, I told David without even making eye contact.
There is no inheritance. I'm Mom's stepchild from long ago. I'm not a real family member, so I can't inherit anything.
0. David's face instantly turned pale.
You're lying, a stepchild? What the hell? You never told me that before,
he shouted. As I calmly explained, David suddenly let out a yell that reverberated throughout the room.
You deceived me. I was expecting an inheritance knowing your dad was a famous lawyer. I made a mistake marrying a plain-looking, middle-aged woman like you. I'm divorcing you right away.
He screamed angrily in a harsh tone and smashed everything on the table onto the floor. The pair of stuffed animals, the photo frame with our wedding photos, the mirror we bought on a trip, the mementos of our time together shattered one after another with loud crashes. Was this the true feelings of the David I had loved so much, the one I had shared so many fun times with when we first met? Overwhelmed by a mix of disappointment and disillusionment, I collapsed weakly on the spot. I couldn't let David see the smile I couldn't hold back. My name is Rala. I'm 36 years old and work at a cosmetics company. My husband's name is David. He's 5 years younger than me, and we met at a foreign language school we were attending at the time. Both David and I work in sales at different companies, and we were studying languages again to keep up with the recent globalization. My father is a famous lawyer who often appears in the media, known as the go-to attorney that everyone wants to consult with. Of course, his sales and assets seem to be quite substantial. We keep our family out of the media spotlight, so my existence isn't widely known to the public, but it still gets around to those around us. The neighbors, acquaintances, friends, and people at work often said various things about my father. With my father being wealthy, many people mistakenly assumed I was financially well off too and would approach me for money. By my 20s, I was already fed up with that situation. I had a few boyfriends, but in the end, everyone was after my father's assets. As soon as we got a little closer, they would say things like wanting me to introduce them to my father or assuming he would support us if we got married. They were all counting on my father's money, and each time I broke up with them, everyone only cared about my father. No one truly saw me for who I am. David, who approached me persistently when I was emotionally unstable, always talked about foreign language lessons and everyday life. Even when I gave in to his enthusiastic invitations and went on a few dates, the topic of my father never came up, and he acted normal when we talked about each other's family. Maybe David didn't know about my father. David always seemed to genuinely enjoy talking with me. We would eat at affordable restaurants, go to theme parks together, and spend carefree days like a normal couple. I have so much fun just being with you, Rala. Seeing you smile next to me makes me feel happy. I really respect how you never slack off in your work, hobbies, or self-improvement. David said to me as we ate delivery pizza together in his room. I want to keep enjoying lots of things together with you. If it's okay, will you be my girlfriend? After slowly opening up to David through our dates, his words made my heart feel warm. This person truly sees me for who I am. With him, we can support each other in life. Tears welled up in my eyes and the pizza in my mouth suddenly tasted salty, yet somehow sweet. Thank you. I'm so happy when I'm with you too, David. I'm looking forward to our future together, I replied. David lovingly supported my back as tears streamed down my face. He never counted on my money to take me to fancy restaurants or eagerly wanted to visit my family's house as if appraising it. The ordinary happiness of eating simple home-cooked meals or delivery pizza in our small rooms had finally come to me too. Filled with a sense of security, I couldn't help but hug David. And so, we continued dating smoothly, but even during that time, David never showed any interest in my family's house. After about 3 years of a normal relationship, we decided to get engaged. If we were going to get married, we had to introduce each other to our parents. I was quite nervous about inviting David to my family's house. Since David didn't seem to know about my father, I was a little scared that he might be surprised and run away. When my father appeared and introduced himself to us as we waited in the living room, David was utterly shocked. Wait, are you the lawyer who's on TV every week, the one everyone wants to consult with? David asked in astonishment. My father let out a hearty laugh at David's surprised reaction. Yes, I am that lawyer. You're the first person to date my daughter and make it this far without knowing. I'm quite surprised myself, he said, still chuckling. David apologetically expressed his regret to my father, who was still laughing after saying that. I'm sorry. I was being absent-minded. I didn't properly ask Rala either. The truth is, I haven't been taking her to nice places for our dates. I've been very rude to both Rala and you. I'm terribly sorry. David continued to apologize. My father, still smiling, said to him, It's all right. You're marrying my daughter, not me. My daughter's life is her own. You don't need to worry about me at all. The best thing is for you two to support each other in a life where you can both feel happiness. My father's demeanor was calm yet dignified, making us feel the depth of his life experience and character as a lawyer who had handled various difficult cases and also worked extensively in the media. Moved by my father's words, David straightened his back, his eyes shining. Yes. I may never be able to achieve as much as you. And I may be younger and unreliable, but I'll do my best to make Rala happy. My father warmly watched over us. A few months later, we were able to hold our wedding ceremony and officially register our marriage without any issues. Some relatives remarked that the scale of the wedding was small for the daughter of a famous lawyer, but it was based on my and David's wish to have a lovely ceremony with just close family. We moved into an apartment to live together, and began our married life as a couple. Even after getting married, we got along well and lived frugally together. To save money, we both quit the foreign language school, but instead, I started having more opportunities to interact with overseas clients at work, and now I'm acquiring foreign languages through practical experience. David seemed to end up staying the same, but he appeared to be working hard at his sales job as he always had. What kind of life would we lead together from now on? I wanted to travel together, and someday, I wanted to have children. I wanted us to steadily walk together towards a happy future. That's what I thought. But was I the only one who felt that way? A few months after our marriage, gradual changes started to appear in David's attitude. At first, he would help with household chores in the evenings and on days off, but recently, he won't even take care of himself, let alone do chores. Clothes left strewn about, dishes he ate from abandoned on the table. When he noticed we were out of daily necessities, he used to take the initiative to go buy them, but lately, he just roughly orders me around, saying things like, "We're out of milk." And what made me doubt my eyes the most was how his spending had become more extravagant. Before, he would invest in himself by going to foreign language school, but he wasn't the type to splurge on food or entertainment. Just as he had told my father, when we went out, he often chose affordable restaurants. That's why I was especially happy when he splurged a little for our anniversary. But now, even when it's not our anniversary, he casually buys expensive brand name watches and nonchalantly makes reservations at 3-star restaurants I've never even been to, saying he's going out drinking with friends. It was so egregious that I asked him, "I understand wanting to splurge, but is our money situation okay?" He brushed me off, saying things like, "I'm married now, so I have to do at least this much to keep up appearances." Even when I cautioned him, "We need to increase our savings for when we have children in the future, so it's problematic if you splurge on your own too much," he responded irresponsibly with, "It'll be fine. We'll manage somehow." Around the time I was fed up with David's carelessness, the bonus season arrived. There wasn't a big change in my bonus, and if anything, it had gone up a little, perhaps because my daily efforts were recognized. The problem was with David, the numbers on his bonus statement had decreased by a digit. Even David looked a bit dissatisfied about this, and when I asked, "It's been reduced to about 1/3 of last time," he said. I hadn't heard anything about the performance of David's company or industry significantly dropping. It was clear that the assessment was due to issues with David himself. "Come to think of it, you've been going out drinking late into the night a lot recently. There were times when you went to work hungover from drinking too much, and you overslept enough to be late to the office a few times, right? Could it be that those things piled up and affected your work?" I asked, choosing my words a bit carefully. It seemed that David's work ethic had become sloppy since we got married. From his daily attitude, his stance towards work naturally became apparent. I couldn't believe that David, who was constantly playing around and being late, could produce results at his company. "Is that so? It seems like the company is having a tough time too. Won't the numbers go back to what they were before next time?" David spoke as if it was someone else's problem, even though I was so worried. There was no sense at all that he would try to change his lifestyle, and despite his bonus being reduced so much, he didn't seem to have any intention of making up for it. Then one day, less than a few weeks after that incident, David was absent from work without notice. As usual, he had been out drinking late the night before, and must have come home in the middle of the night while I was fast asleep. No matter how many times I tried to wake him up the next morning, he wouldn't get up. "I don't care anymore," I said, leaving him behind as I headed to my own company. But in the end, David never woke up on his own and didn't show up at work after that. Moreover, it seemed he had continued sleeping without even contacting his company. When I came home and saw David still sleeping in the same state as that morning, I couldn't believe my eyes.
Don't tell me you seriously skipped work without notice?
I couldn't help raising my voice at his behavior, which was far too irresponsible for both a husband and a working adult. I couldn't wake up.
The company called, so I took the day off.
David muttered. Unbelievable. His workplace had gone out of their way to contact him, worried when he didn't show up at the scheduled time. He inconvenienced his company, didn't do his job, and on top of that, showed no sign of remorse. I felt a sense of despair towards David, who had turned into a good-for-nothing completely different from the man I married.
Do you understand what you've done? Your performance reviews are dropping, you're going to work sleep-deprived and hungover every day, and now you're skipping without notice? What are you going to do if you get fired over this?
I couldn't help crying out, deeply concerned about David's life and our future together. The next words out of David's mouth left me speechless.
Then we can just borrow money from Ben.
In that instant, everything went dark before my eyes. Since when did this man start counting on my father's wealth? I wondered in disbelief. He had promised my father that he would find happiness with me while supporting each other. He used to say he was happy just being with me and enjoyed our simple life together. I felt like a fool for believing I could find happiness with David. Now, in the end, David was only with me for the money too. He was no different from all the others in my past. Are human beings creatures who inevitably become blinded by wealth? Then was it a mistake to introduce him to my father before the wedding? Disappointment, regret, disillusionment, sadness, various emotions swirled within me. If things continue this way, I might have to consider divorce, I realized grimly. Even after that, David didn't change his attitude. Although he stopped skipping work without notice after apparently receiving a stern warning from his company, he never quit his flashy nighttime entertainment or wasteful spending. When he started showing an unbelievable level of frivolous spending, like impulsively buying expensive brand-name shoes and bags without much thought, I even felt a sense of dread thinking about what would become of David in the future. Anxious about my own life, several months ended up passing just like that. And then one day, my father suddenly passed away. It wasn't an accident or incident, but a sudden death from illness. Of course, my father's business associates and the media made a huge commotion, and those around him suddenly became very busy. Having lost my mother long ago and with no siblings, my father was my only family. Until the funeral was over, I was far too busy to even have time to cry, but when everything was finally done, a sense of loss and sadness washed over me. My father, who had single-handedly raised me while juggling his main job and media work, was always calm, wise, and the object of my utmost respect. Even when I felt like giving up during my college entrance exams or job hunting, my father's attitude of never shying away from effort and learning in anything encouraged me and helped me overcome those challenges. He was only 66 years old, far too young to pass away. As I was grieving alone in my room, David barged in without even knocking. I knew that David had barely helped with the funeral arrangements, idly fiddling with his smartphone in a corner the whole time while I was busy handling all the various preparations and correspondence. Having already given up on David after everything that had happened, I didn't even feel like scolding him in that moment. As I crouched by the bed, clinging to it and crying, David stood over me without even bothering to crouch down and meet my eyes.
"Hey, how much inheritance is there?"
he asked. It all comes down to money in the end, I thought, disgusted. As I remained silent, not even bothering to respond to his words, David stepped closer and raised his voice.
"How much is there?" "With how much he earned, there must be a ton of money left, right?"
You're his only living relative, so you'll get the inheritance, yeah?
He was grinning repulsively, even though his wife's father had just passed away. It seemed that now that my father was gone, David thought he had become a multimillionaire overnight. Lazing around without working while splurging extravagantly, that self-indulgent lifestyle dangled right in front of him, and his face looked so vulgar, as if he was about to start drooling. I even felt a sense of revulsion. Lying on the bed, I told David without even making eye contact.
There is no inheritance.
David immediately shouted.
That's impossible! He died suddenly, so there's no way he used it all up.
That's not it. I'm the stepchild of my long-deceased mother. I'm not his real family, so I can't inherit anything.
It's zero. Just as I told David now, I have no blood relation to the father I respected so much. This was part of the reason why my father never revealed his family to the media.
You're lying, a stepchild? What the hell? You never told me that before, he shouted.
It's true that he raised me until I became an adult and that we cherished each other, and since Mom passed away long ago, I just thought there was no need to specifically mention it.
I had nothing more to say to David. Instead of telling him to get out, I sighed. Suddenly, David let out a yell loud enough to echo throughout the room.
You deceived me! Why do you think I've been sucking up to Ben all this time? Give me back these past few years!
What? For a moment, I thought my heart would stop. What did he just say? Before I could even ask, David flew into a rage and smashed everything on the table onto the floor. The pair of stuffed animals, the photo frame holding our wedding photos, the mirror we bought on a trip, the mementos of our time together shattered one after another with loud crashes.
You're an idiot, so you probably thought I was some prince who fell for you purely without knowing about Ben, right? It was all an act. There was someone in the same class as me at the foreign language school who recognized your face right away and secretly told me everything. They said there must be a ton of guys coming after you for Ben's money, so if I pretended not to know and put on a pure love act, you'd fall for it immediately.
I couldn't believe it. Unlike school or work, your identity isn't revealed at hobby classes, so I had let my guard down. Since no one had ever mentioned anything about me in the foreign language class, I truly believed that David had come to like me without knowing about my father. David had just accused me of deceiving him, but I was the one who had been deceived. David clicked his tongue loudly.
What are you gonna do about this? You've ruined my whole life plan. I desperately acted like a good guy for 3 years thinking I'd get my hands on that inheritance. Otherwise, who'd bother with a plain-looking, middle-aged woman like you?
As soon as he revealed his true colors, he started saying whatever he wanted. My disappointment had already reached its limit, and I didn't have the energy to strongly argue back. I just felt my heart grow cold.
I was planning to divorce you as soon as the inheritance came through without a hitch. I've been seeing someone for about a year now, so I was gonna marry her and build a nice house with that money to let her live in luxury.
After exposing his lies to me, he even confessed to cheating. I couldn't help but react to this. I raised my face, widened my eyes, and stared intently at David.
What did you just say? A year ago? Wasn't that around the time we decided to get married?
That's right. It was just about a year ago that I had accepted David's proposal and gone to report it to my father.
Don't tell me you cheated because our marriage was decided?
That's right.
If I'm gonna be with someone, of course I want a young, pretty girl. There was someone I'd had my eye on for a while. But cute girls cost money, you know? I couldn't afford to date her on my salary. So I somehow managed to secure this marriage with you.
What a perfect plan. David and his petty desires had been using both me and my father all along. When David went out drinking with his friends and colleagues, was he actually spending most of that time on dates with his mistress? My heart pounded loudly with anger. My fingertips grew hot and started to tremble.
This was a real waste. If you don't have money, I have no use for you. I'm divorcing you right away.
David spat out. I quietly told him, facing his direction.
Of course. I'd refuse to be with someone who deceived us the whole time and even cheated. Let's get divorced quickly. And since you cheated, I'll be seeking compensation too.
Perhaps triggered by the mention of monetary compensation, David, who had seemed to calm down after saying his piece, began to fly into a rage again.
Compensation? I should be the one getting that from you. I'm the one who was deceived this whole time. And do you even have any proof of cheating to show a lawyer? Photos? Recordings?
You don't have anything, do you? David taunted. Even as I felt my anger about to explode from his provocation, I tried my best to speak calmly.
You're right. It would be difficult to get compensation without evidence. Then I won't seek compensation. There's no inheritance, so we can't divide assets either. Just promise that from now on, you won't have anything to do with me or my family. That's enough.
David then said with emotionless eyes.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't ever want to be involved with you again either.
With just those words, he left the room, deliberately slamming the door hard to make a loud noise as he went. A few days later, after getting David to sign the divorce papers and the written oath he had mentioned the day before about never involving himself with me again, we got divorced. Having lost both my father and David in a matter of days, I returned to my family home feeling empty inside. My father's presence still lingered in the room he had been living in until recently, and I cried there once more. After that, I returned to work and began to get used to living alone in my family home, and a peaceful life gradually started to come back. Then, about 2 weeks later, my smartphone started ringing incessantly all day long. At work, I put it on silent mode and kept it in my locker to avoid disturbing others, but it was the same situation at home, so it was unbearably disruptive to my life. The caller was David every time. I had ignored it for several days, but it was so persistent that I decided to answer just once. If I listened to what he had to say one time, these persistent calls would probably stop. The moment I pressed the call button, David started yelling in a harsh tone from the other end of the line.
You! How dare you lie to me back then? There was an inheritance after all, wasn't there? Why didn't you give it to me?
His shouting was so unpleasant that I reflexively pulled the receiver away from my ear. The TV in my room happened to be showing the news, and I watched it. It was a story about how the recently deceased father's relatives had donated his sizable estate entirely to non-profit organizations. David had probably seen this news, learned that there actually was an inheritance, and was now in a rage. There was actually a small lie in the story about not having an inheritance I could inherit due to lack of blood relation. It was true that I was my mother's child from a previous marriage and had no blood relation to my father, but when my parents remarried, I was still in elementary school and they had legally adopted me. And my father, a popular lawyer, had prepared a will just in case something happened, which stated that I would inherit his entire estate. Of course, since a lawyer had drawn it up, it was legally airtight. When my father passed away, David was already living a lazy life of wastefulness. So I had kept quiet, thinking that if I revealed the existence of the inheritance, he would spend it all without working.
And what the hell is up with that amount? $2 million?
With that money, you'd never have to worry about living expenses again. Why did you keep quiet about it? You idiot.
Since David and I were already divorced and he was now a stranger, there was no way for him to get his hands on my family's money. David seemed to have his blood boiling from the shock and frustration of losing his chance to get his hands on a large sum of money.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. I don't want to give even a single cent to someone who obsesses over other people's money despite not even working hard himself,
I said firmly. David let out a pathetic sound from the other end of the line.
Did you really donate it all? Didn't you keep even a little for yourself?
I was actually impressed by how bad he was at giving up as I answered.
I really donated the entire amount, not even a cent left. Dad's money is no longer in our possession.
Then I heard a blatant tongue click from the other end of the receiver. You really are an idiot.
Why the hell would you donate it? If you had kept it for yourself, you could have had a good life. I made the right call divorcing a stupid woman like you.
With those parting words, David hung up the phone unilaterally. Finally feeling calm, I blocked David's number. After that, David apparently went out drinking every day, shocked that the inheritance he was counting on from his ex-wife's father was completely gone. Of course, his work attitude and performance at the company worsened even further. Moreover, the fact that he had married his ex-wife for the inheritance and divorced her as soon as her father passed away spread throughout the company, further lowering people's opinion of his character. Meanwhile, when I tried using social media to look for David's mistress, I quickly found her personal account. It seemed David had been quite generous with her, counting on my father's inheritance, but now that it was all gone, he couldn't even put on a good face for her anymore.
The guy I was dating got divorced, but lately he keeps saying he has no money, so the presents and dinners have completely stopped. I was dating him because I thought he'd let me live in luxury, but now I'm thinking of breaking up.
Read a post by his mistress. Seeing that, I held my aching head. If David was after my father's money, it seemed his mistress was after David's money. They were all just a bunch of greedy, classless jerks. I closed that page with a straight face, deciding never to look at it again. About 3 weeks after my last phone call with David, an unexpected visitor came to my company one day. An employee in charge of the reception called for me with a troubled look, so I followed them to the hallway where David was waiting, looking much more haggard than before. "What are you thinking, coming to my workplace?" I asked. David looked at me with a fawning gaze, laughing.
I was thinking after that. When my bonus went down, yours went up, right? So even if you don't have Ben's inheritance, you must have your own savings, yeah?
I was shocked, never expecting him to bring up my money.
I've been taking out loans for shopping and using my card for bar tabs, so now my debt has piled up. At this rate, it's going to affect my life. I want you to help me out a little. Come on, please?
David pleaded. Just when I thought he had finally given up on my father's inheritance, now he was coming to demand my savings. I felt so dizzy from his outrageous nerve that I nearly collapsed on the spot.
Of course not,
I declared.
Every time you look at someone, it's money, money, money. I'm so sick of it. If you want money that badly, then work hard, save up, and make your own money.
Don't make such a scary face. You're really not cute at all. Want me to tell you how much debt I'm in? $20,000. Even the woman I was going to marry dumped me recently, saying I'm too stingy. I've hit rock bottom. Can't you help me out a little?
David persisted with a pathetic look on his face. Having lost both money and women, His sulking figure was simply pathetic and ugly.
You selfishly counted on my family and racked up debt on your own, right? Deal with it yourself. You're really being a nuisance, so leave right now.
Hearing our raised voices, employees and security guards started gathering around us. Of course, the employees close to me knew about my father and had been invited to the wedding, so they recognized David's face. My boss, who had rushed over, had the security guards escort David out, resolving the situation peacefully for the moment. Afterwards, he talked with me at length and said he would make sure David couldn't get into the company again in the future. Then my boss got angry at David, saying,
I can't stand seeing someone who works so humbly and diligently suffering because of a nasty ex-husband.
While sympathizing with me. He even praised my sincere and competent work ethic and told me he would give me a good assessment next time. After that, David's lifestyle completely fell apart. He started being late and skipping work without notice repeatedly until he was finally fired from his company. Of course, David had no savings, so he quickly became unable to pay rent and living expenses. He was kicked out of his home and apparently ended up on the streets. Drinking too much, his health deteriorated and his appearance worsened. Of course, it was impossible for David to find another job as a full-time employee. He's somehow working a live-in part-time job and slowly paying off his debts with his meager wages. For years, he deceived one woman and flew into a rage when things didn't go his way. He couldn't manage himself properly at all, going with the easy flow and continuing to indulge himself. Such a self-centered and immature man is now being forced to endure a constricted lifestyle. Actually, there was still something I was hiding from David. The apartment that belonged to my father, where I'm living now, is in a prime location in the city and has considerable asset value. After living here for a while, I'm considering either finding a new home or selling this apartment if I ever find a new partner. And it's not a lie that I donated the inheritance, but it wasn't the entire amount as I told David. The will stated that I could use it as I liked, but that I should use a little for myself. My father seemed to have seen through the fact that I, who had long been interested in activities to save children around the world, would donate to organizations. I won't betray my precious father. That's why I decided to keep a little for myself, as per my father's will. $500,000, which is 1/4 of the inheritance, is in my account now. Of course, I won't use it for brand name goods to show off or for valueless entertainment. I want to use it carefully for my own future. I'll leave the kid for you to take care. As I wondered what he meant, Thomas uttered something unbelievable. Apparently, he was taking advantage of our current separation to live with his affair partner. He wanted to divorce me, right after my mother passed away, to marry his mistress. I had heard that separation is often treated like divorce, making it hard to claim compensation for infidelity after separating. Not caring anymore, I hung up the phone. 3 days later, I had 23 missed calls from Thomas on my mobile phone. But I thought his actions were despicable and didn't respond, just blocked his number. However, Thomas was persistent. He even sent texts through social media, which he normally never uses. That's when I decided to fight back against Thomas.
Fine, if that's how you want it, I'll show you hell.
Thomas, who didn't even attend my mother's funeral and was planning an elopement with his mistress, didn't deserve any sympathy. I was determined to pay him back double for everything he had done to us. My name is Sandra, a 46-year-old part-time worker and a housewife. My family consists of my husband Thomas, a year older than me, and our 16-year-old daughter in high school, Margaret. We lived in a small apartment in the countryside. I got married when I was 23, but after discovering I was infertile, it took 5 years of fertility treatments to finally have our long-awaited daughter. But after Margaret was born, I struggled with first-time parenting. Gradually, I lost my peace of mind and left the company I worked for, temporarily becoming a full-time housewife. In our society, whenever Margaret got sick, her mother, was called to accompany her to the hospital. This was what led me to quit my job. It wasn't that I hated caring for Margaret, but my boss indirectly suggested I resign, and I couldn't bear it and ran away. Eventually, staying at home all the time seemed depressing, so I put Margaret in daycare and started earning a bit as a part-time worker. Both Thomas and I couldn't forget the hardship of 5 years of fertility treatment, and we eventually settled on having just Margaret. I first noticed something was off with Thomas when Margaret was in upper elementary school. Margaret was academically gifted, so I really wanted her to try for private middle school. Margaret was positive about the idea of middle school entrance exams, and we even attended open campus events together to choose the best school. Thomas earned enough for us to live comfortably, even with me as a housewife. Plus, I was prepared to use my savings from before marriage or untouched part-time earnings for Margaret's education funds. But Thomas was adamantly against it. No. He was unyielding in his refusal to let Margaret take the exams.
What's the point of a middle school entrance exam?
Let her go to a regular middle school, that's enough for Margaret.
Isn't the entrance exam something for daughters of company presidents or something?
No matter how I tried to convince him, Thomas stubbornly refused. Finally, losing patience, I told Margaret,
"You can take the exam if you want. I want to support what you want to do. Just focus on your studies without any worries."
But Margaret just shook her head, looking sorry. She probably hated seeing us argue over her future. That's when I realized it. I shouldn't be showing this side of us to our child. I started to be extra careful not to get into intense arguments with Thomas for Margaret's sake. That marked the beginning of a life walking on eggshells around Thomas. But the more I tried to be careful, the more sensitive I became, and even trivial things would turn into arguments. "Hey, I've been meaning to say this for a while. Isn't this stew too salty? I've always hated this kind of seasoning." Thomas suddenly confessed that he never liked my cooking. After our argument about the entrance exam, it seemed like he no longer held back. He started criticizing without care. For example, he started saying he didn't like Worcestershire sauce or that he always hated the tomatoes in his sandwiches. He kept going on about it at the dinner table, making me feel quite bad. So, reluctantly, I stopped adding tomatoes, which I used to make the dishes look good, and carrots, which he also said he didn't like.
"I don't want your lunch anymore. It doesn't look good and I lose my appetite."
I responded to his requests, but to that he threw away the lunch I made. Fed up with his constant complaints, I finally exploded in anger.
"Then eat out. If you're going to complain that much, I won't make your sandwiches ever again."
And from that point on, I stopped making sandwiches for Thomas altogether. A turning point came sometime later. It was when Margaret, who was attending a public middle school, was about to face high school entrance exams. Despite attending public school, she participated in an archery club outside of school and achieved a national competition placement. Margaret was also academically successful and skilled at piano, a hobby I had introduced to her. She always looked forward to her weekly lessons. She was an all-rounder, diligent, and even serving as the vice president of the student council. Although I had reluctantly made her give up on middle school entrance exams, I hoped this time she could attend the high school of her choice. When I asked about her preferred high school, she named a renowned private school within the state.
"I wasn't sure if I should say it, but I really want to go here. It's a prestigious school for archery, and I'll work hard for it."
I nodded emphatically at Margaret's words. Margaret had started to accommodate her father Thomas, always putting herself last. She would decline offers to buy books or clothes she wanted.
"It's okay."
Even when I gave her these as birthday gifts, she looked apologetic. Seeing my child like this filled me, as a mother, with a sense of helplessness. That's why I wanted to make her bravely spoken dream a reality. I reassured her that we could afford it with my savings and education insurance. However, when I informed Thomas about Margaret's educational aspirations, predictably, he flatly refused. no way.
Attending a private high school in the state means she can't commute from here.
So, she'll need a dorm or an apartment, right?
I won't allow it. It's a waste of money.
His words infuriated me. Calling the education expenses for our only daughter a waste? I couldn't hold back.
You opposed to her middle school exams too. Why do you always say such things? Doesn't she deserve to live her life the way she wants?
But my words seemed to have no effect on Thomas. He sighed theatrically and exclaimed,
No, private school and living alone as a high school student are a waste of money. If she doesn't go to a local public high school, I won't support you guys financially anymore.
At that moment, I snapped.
Fine, have it your way. But don't complain about whatever we decide to do. I'll figure it out, so you go ahead and apply to the high school you want. There's no need for you to compromise this time. Okay? Do as you wish.
I encouraged Margaret again, but she looked worried. But she hesitated. Even so, I repeatedly reassured her.
It's okay.
And it seemed that Margaret had made up her mind. The following spring, Margaret successfully got into her first-choice high school.
Mom, I did it.
Margaret returned from school with a beaming smile and shared the news. There's no parent who wouldn't be overjoyed at their child's successful high school entrance. I made a red velvet cake and praised her like crazy. Although there were tough times, she had done well. However, Thomas, not celebrating this achievement, said something awful.
As promised, you take care of Margaret and yourself from now on. I won't contribute to the household expenses anymore.
And just like that, he coldly stated his decision and stopped providing for the household expenses. Margaret would be moving into the high school dormitory soon. For me, knowing that my parenting phase was somewhat coming to an end and having already decided to work as a regular employee at a hospital where an acquaintance worked, I didn't think I would struggle financially. Therefore, Thomas's words and actions didn't bother me anymore. Months had passed since Margaret started high school. She had adapted to her new life, and I was relieved to hear that. I was working part-time, similar to full-time hours, at a hospital where an acquaintance worked, with an expectation of being made a full-time employee soon. I thought we wouldn't struggle financially. Thus, Thomas's words and actions didn't bother me anymore. Although Thomas and I hadn't divorced yet, we had been living separately for months after he moved out to a different apartment. I was busy with my new life, but realizing I could live without Thomas, I planned to divorce him as soon as everything was ready. I assumed Thomas wouldn't want to continue this separation forever either. Believing this separation would end one way or another, I went to the city office to get divorce papers. But then, I received devastating news. My mom back home had passed away. When I got the call from my dad, I was so shocked that I collapsed. Mom had always been frail, in and out of hospitals since I was young. I remembered praying with Dad for her successful surgeries. I knew she had been battling cancer for a year now and understood that her time was limited. Still, the news of her passing was hard to accept. Dad, having lost his lifelong partner, looked utterly defeated and downcast. He clearly lacked the strength to act as the representative of the family at the funeral. So, I stepped up to take on that role. Being an only child, there was no one else who could do it. Dad weakly smiled at my offer.
That would be a great help,
he said in a faint voice. We hadn't told anyone about our separation, not even Dad or our acquaintances. So, I thought it best to invite Thomas to the funeral. I quickly sent him a text with details about Mom's passing and the funeral arrangements. As expected, there was no reply. On the day of the funeral, Thomas didn't show up, and Margaret, who had come home for the occasion, muttered, "He's the worst." Even Dad, who looked so frail, was angry, feeling insulted for his wife and daughter. I had my own grievances against Thomas, but now wasn't the time for that.
Both of you, I feel the same way. But do you want to send her off with angry faces? Mom always said, nothing can beat a smile, didn't she?
My words reminded Dad and Margaret of Mom's cheerful nature. We managed to regain our composure and give Mom a proper send-off. That night, Thomas finally called back, but with an insensitive remark. "I'll leave the kid for you to take care." In such a situation, what was he thinking? As I silently pondered, Thomas, unasked, began to talk volubly. "Let me put it simple. I'm planning to elope with my girlfriend. She's younger and cuter than you." Apparently, he was living with his mistress, using our separation to his advantage, and wanted to divorce me right after my mom's death so he could marry her. I've heard separation is often treated like divorce, making it hard to claim alimony for infidelity afterwards. But for me, such things didn't matter anymore. "Oh, really? Do as you please," I replied and hung up the phone. 3 days later, I had 23 missed calls from Thomas on my mobile phone. Thinking how despicable he was, I didn't respond and blocked his number. When he realized I wasn't going to answer the phone, he started sending apologies through social media. That's when I decided to fight back against Thomas.
Fine, if that's how you want it, I'll show you hell.
Thomas had declared abandoning me and Margaret at the time of my mother's funeral, and on top of that, he was planning an elopement with his mistress. Mercy was unnecessary for someone like him who had mistreated us. I decided to pay him back double for everything he had done. I immediately texted to Thomas.
"Let's meet tomorrow."
The next day, I waited for Thomas at the cafe where we had agreed to meet. A few minutes later, Thomas arrived in a hurry, his face pale and clearly agitated. I had nothing to say to him. So, I just silently, or perhaps glaringly, stared at him. Thomas, unnerved by my uncharacteristically explicit attitude, slowly began to speak. "I truly regret not being able to attend your mom's funeral. But there's a reason. I'm a bit shaken, you know, it was just bad timing." Curious, I listened to his explanation. Apparently, one of Thomas's relatives had collapsed and was in critical condition, needing surgery to have a chance of survival.
So what? If surgery is the only option, then just do it. What does that have to do with anything else?
Thomas's face twisted in anguish as he replied. "It's a complex surgical procedure that can't be done in a normal hospital. So, it's going to be expensive, and insurance won't cover it." According to Thomas, it was an advanced medical operation that had to be paid entirely out of pocket. His family decided to pool money, and Thomas had to contribute around $10,000. I was astounded. How could he so easily spin such lies?
"It's not Betty or Richard, it's some relative I've never even met, right?"
When I coldly responded, Thomas turned red with anger.
"Don't be so cold. You, who just lost your mother, should understand my feelings."
I understood, but it was an entirely different issue.
"First of all, the timing of your relative's illness right after my mother's death is suspicious. And is it really a disease that requires advanced medical treatment? What's the diagnosis? How much will the surgery cost in total?"
As I pressed him with my thoughts, Thomas stumbled over his words and fell silent. My family, being well-known local landowners, had savings close to $1 million, which I was aware of. Even though Thomas might not know the details, he knew my family was wealthy, so I suspected he was after the inheritance. Given his past behavior, I couldn't trust him, even if he genuinely needed a significant amount of money for a medical issue. I sighed exaggeratedly and then continued. "What you and I need to discuss are divorce, custody, and division of assets. That's all." But then Thomas pleaded.
"Wait. I'll never do anything to make you sad again. Reconsider, please."
His face was contorted, clearly desperate to change the situation. I spoke again, more firmly. "I can't have any hope for a future with you anymore. If you feel sorry, please proceed with the divorce." Saying that, I stood up, paid only for my coffee, and left. That night, Thomas unexpectedly showed up at our house.
"Hey, I know you're in there, open the door."
When Thomas left to start our separation, he said he'd never return and left the keys, so naturally, he couldn't get in. However, at that moment, I was in the bathroom and didn't notice Thomas's arrival. It appeared that Margaret had responded instead, and when I noticed something was amiss and went to the front door, I saw the two of them. Margaret was home for the summer holidays, and had been staying with us since the funeral. What I saw was Thomas deeply apologizing and Margaret standing tall, looking down on him.
"What's going on? Thomas, what are you doing here?"
Thomas looked up, begging for forgiveness.
Please, I'm begging you. Can you just lend me $10,000 as an advance on the property division?
I thought he had come to apologize, but he was still asking for money. It became clear that Thomas didn't care about me or Margaret. Frustrated, I almost let my anger take over but managed to hold back. I wanted to yell and drive him away, but I knew running away wasn't an option anymore. For Margaret's sake, this separation needed to be resolved quickly. After taking a deep breath to calm myself, I said to Thomas,
"That's irrelevant now. I already told you I wouldn't help you out with that. We handled my mother's funeral with my relatives, and you were not involved. Therefore, I don't see any need to care for a relative of yours I've never met."
Thomas seemed to lose his words in response, as if he had nothing to say back. Thomas had always been hands-off with my family matters, whether it was hospitalization or funerals. Yet, now that he was in a bind, he wanted my help, which was far too convenient. Realizing that nothing he said would change my mind, Thomas turned to Margaret.
Margaret, you tell Mom too. To you, a relative of your father is family too, right? Come on, please. You're kind-hearted, you'd feel bad knowing a family member is sick, right?
Typically quiet, and when he did speak it was usually sarcastic, but in such moments, Thomas became talkative. And now, he was clinging to the daughter he tried to abandon for his mistress, having not even paid for her high school. I felt a headache coming on. I endured a lot for Margaret's sake, but maybe it would have been better to have divorced from the start and lived just the two of us. But it was too late for regrets now. I wondered what Margaret was thinking. Maybe she'd be moved by her father's words and try to persuade me. But as embarrassing as it was for me to have even considered that for a moment, Margaret responded with a resolute expression. "Who are you?" Both Thomas and I were stunned by her response. It wasn't rejection or comfort, but a denial of his very existence. Watching Margaret's composed face, I felt relieved. Impressed by the strength of my grown-up daughter, Margaret continued without looking at Thomas.
"You said you're leaving the kid to Mom, right? So, you've essentially abandoned your parental rights. You're divorcing Mom and going with your mistress, aren't you?"
It seemed Margaret had overheard my phone conversation with Thomas. I thought I had been discreet, but she must have had her own thoughts about her father not attending the funeral. To her, a man who was separated and unfaithful, saying he didn't need her, was nothing more than a stranger. She declared him an outsider. That left Thomas utterly devastated, frozen in place. Margaret sighed deeply and glared at him.
"After all the obstacles you've put in my path, don't try to act like a father now. To me, the only parent is Mom. I don't care about someone who didn't even show up for my beloved grandmother's funeral."
Thomas stayed motionless for a while, but gradually seemed to grasp Margaret's words. Rising up with a furious look, he stared at Margaret.
You ungrateful child. Do you know how much I've sacrificed for you? If you're going to say that, then pay back all the school fees I've paid up till middle school.
How childish was he? Who demands repayment for raising their own child? It made me nauseous to think he was my husband. Thomas, about to say something more, stepped closer to us. Margaret, sensing fear, stepped back. But just then, we heard the siren of a police car and saw it stop in front of the apartment. Thomas halted his advance and slowly turned around. Outside, the people I faced were our neighbors, their expressions even more daunting than Thomas's. Caught up in the commotion with Thomas, I hadn't realized I left the front door open. The walls of the apartment are thin, and many people were home during the evening hours. A neighbor, having heard the ruckus, apparently called the police. When Thomas realized the police were there for him, he became visibly flustered, losing all his previous bravado. The officers stepped out of the patrol car and came straight to us to inquire about the situation. Our neighbors had reported Thomas as a suspicious person. I've always had a good relationship with my neighbors. And when I mentioned my mother's funeral, they even said, "Please let us pay our respects." So they attended, and noticing that Thomas was absent, I had candidly explained. Remembering how they had unanimously condemned Thomas's absence and behavior recently, it was no surprise they called the police when they heard him causing a scene. Thomas always said neighborhood relations were unnecessary, but in that moment, I was grateful for our close-knit community. And the police didn't irresponsibly leave the scene unresolved. Thomas desperately tried to clear up the misunderstanding.
"I'm the head of this household. What's wrong with a husband returning to his wife and daughter's home? This is just a little family disagreement, nothing that needs to trouble the police."
That's what he was pleading. His earnest plea only sparked a chorus of boos from onlookers. The officer calmed the crowd and then asked me if Thomas's claims were true. I answered honestly.
"I'm embarrassed to say, but we are currently separated. My husband already has someone else, and we were ready for divorce. I've even prepared the divorce papers."
The officer believed my story and instructed Thomas to return to his current residence. The neighbors, who had been watching from a distance, emanated an aura of "go back home already." Thomas still seemed eager to argue, but I told him, "This won't solve anything.
Besides, when we separated, this house was transferred to my name, and I've been paying the rent.
Don't just barge in." He had no reply to that. Margaret then chimed in, echoing my sentiment.
"Officer, I'm scared of this man."
That seemed to be the final straw. The police, recognizing the need to protect Margaret, a minor, firmly told Thomas,
"Dad, it's time to go home."
Facing the backlash, Thomas realized his efforts were futile and dejectedly left. 2 weeks have passed since Thomas's visit. I consulted a lawyer about the incident and decided to proceed with the divorce, seeking their assistance. Given Thomas's behavior, a straightforward discussion seemed unlikely. The lawyer agreed, confirming my decision was right. Finally, the day came to speak with Thomas again. He appeared dejected, but I unceremoniously handed him the documents without a word. Thomas browsed through them, puzzled at first, but his expression turned to one of shock.
"Wait, what is this? How did you find this out?"
The document detailed a compensation claim against Thomas and his mistress. All of Thomas's previous behavior was a facade. While it was true he had an affair, the woman had instigated him to play a part.
If the mother-in-law had passed away, Sandra will inherit something, right? Just shake her up a bit, and she'll probably want to settle with money. It'll be easier for us to get married. How about getting around $10,000?
The story about needing money for advanced medical treatment for a sick family member was a lie. It was a fictional scenario created to swindle money from me. I had felt uneasy about the whole situation. After the funeral, Thomas had called nonchalantly, ready to break up, but then suddenly turned desperate by dawn. I suspected there was more to it. The timing was too convenient. Trusting my intuition, right after Thomas's call, I secretly hired a private investigator to conduct a background check. With Thomas openly admitting his affair, he made no attempt to hide his infidelity, making gathering evidence straightforward. Furthermore, emboldened by his admission, he was captured toasting with his mistress.
"To our 5th anniversary, cheers!"
This meant Thomas had been having an affair for 5 years, even before our separation when our marriage wasn't yet in disarray. This meant I could claim compensation. Confronted with his lies exposed, Thomas began to tremble. His hands weakened, dropping the stack of papers on the desk. His eyes became vacant, his mouth moving as if searching for words. After 5 minutes, he managed to utter, "What should I do?" I leaned forward as if I had been waiting for those words.
I'll be claiming $30,000 from you as compensation for the affair and the emotional distress you've caused me. And from the other woman, $10,000.
These amounts were the maximum claimable according to standard rates. Thomas panicked at the hefty sum.
I can't pay that. I mean, if I do, it will ruin my life.
His excuses were expected. So, I presented an alternative.
Then let's settle it with compensation in the form of property division. But child support is a separate matter. You'll pay for all of Margaret's expenses, including her high school and future college fees.
Faced with Thomas's refusal, I pressed on.
If you default, I'll go to court for enforcement. Your employer will be notified, and the amount will be deducted from your salary.
Faced with this reality, Thomas reluctantly signed the documents my lawyer had prepared. This marked the end of our long battle. Afterwards, Thomas and I officially divorced, and the financial matters were settled through compensatory property division. Thomas had nearly no savings due to funding his mistress. So in the end, I was only able to protect the savings I had diligently amassed. Naturally, Thomas ended up with nothing from the divorce, a significant blow to him. Concerned about his employer finding out, he has been diligently paying child support every month. Margaret, as if to spite him, studied hard and got accepted into a prestigious private university. I can only imagine the look on Thomas's face when he received the bill for her tuition. His mistress, shortly after paying me the compensation, was arrested and convicted on charges of marriage fraud. It turns out she had other partners besides Thomas, promising marriage to each of them. Thomas really lacked judgment. Thomas, having lost his family, money, and mistress, and as well as his relationships with relatives and friends, would not have ventured into an affair if he had known it would lead to such despair. He lacked such foresight. Now, he leads a lonely life of just working and going home, paying child support every month. Apparently, his colleagues and neighbors knew about his situation, and he faces their cold stares, living in misery. Never underestimate the power of rural gossip network. Thomas learned this the hard way. Meanwhile, I returned home to support my dad, leading a peaceful life. One day, as my daughter was nearing her college graduation, she brought home a young man who seemed very pleasant.
He's my boyfriend.
Dad, moved to tears at the prospect of Margaret's marriage, and I finally felt a sense of relief. Months later, as I helped Margaret with her veil on her wedding day, she said to me with tears in her eyes,
"Mom, thank you for raising me. I promise I'll live a happy life."
Attending my beloved daughter Margaret's wedding filled me with joy. Having parted ways with a terrible husband and seeing Margaret in her wedding dress was more than enough to fill my heart. I decided to cherish every minute and second for the rest of my life. Suddenly, the electricity bill skyrocketed. In a panic, we called the utility company, and the technician came over, looking puzzled.
"Have you seen this wire before?"
As my husband, Sam, and I rushed over, the technician carefully moved a plant nearby to make it easier for us to see. From an external outlet of our house, a strange wiring extended, heading towards the in-laws' house.
"Do you know anything about this wiring?"
Sam and I exchanged glances. We were probably thinking the same thing.
Hey, Sam. Could this be? Yeah, no doubt. This is why our electricity bill suddenly spiked.
Sam then reached out to the outlet and quickly unplugged the wiring. The moment he did it, a high-pitched scream came from the direction of the in-laws' house.
Ah!
It must be Mael, Nicola. Then, some hysterical muttering was heard, and the voice came out of the door, heading our way. And there, Nicola burst out from the garden. "I am Mary, a 32-year-old housewife. My hobby is eating sweets. Every day, I gather information about sweets by asking friends or researching on my own. Sam, my kind husband, always accompanies me in this hobby. Sam and I, both the same age, have been together since college. I have always loved Sam for his kindness, unchanged from the moment we met. Incidentally, I also adored Tony and Nicola, Sam's parents who raised him. Many of my married friends struggle with their MILs. I've even heard stories that ended in divorce due to issues with the MIL. Fortunately, such problems were irrelevant to our family. Nicola, who shares my love for sweets, always delights in the treats I bring over, and my FIL, Tony, though a man of few words, always gives a sense of comfort with his constant smiles. Both of them are dear to me, and I like them so much. Tony and Nicola now live about a 30-minute drive away. Not too close, yet not too far, just the right distance. But sometimes, I think, would it be possible to live together with such a couple? Not that I want to live together. But, perhaps, it could work out well. I was fond of them to the point of entertaining such thoughts. However, the world isn't always so sweet, as I would later come to realize the truth. One day, I was baffled by the news Sam shared with me.
What? Tony and Nicola?
Turns out, Tony and Nicola were moving into the vacant house next door to us. I had assumed their in-laws' house was owned, but it turned out to be a rental. They were considering moving since their place was getting old. And when they found out the house next to ours was vacant, they set their sights on it. It was an unexpected close-distance living arrangement. I was instantly overwhelmed by anxiety. We had been getting along fine with Tony and Nicola, but would it continue to be okay? Living next door meant we could see each other every day if we wanted. I liked Tony and Nicola, but seeing them every day might be too much. But it was too late to say, "It's too close, so please don't move in." When Sam heard about the move, he gently advised Tony and Nicola that it might not be a good idea. However, they didn't listen, saying, "We're so close now, it'll be fine." I wanted to kick myself for my previously optimistic thought that living together could be possible. As my anxiety grew, Tony and Nicola moved in. Though I greeted them warily, things seemed fine at first. We kept a good distance, and some boundaries were established. But as they settled in, Nicola began to cross those boundaries. That was the force that overcame all the actions we didn't want her to do. Unannounced visits became the norm, and when she came over, they acted as if our house was her own. Not only that, but our actions seemed to be constantly monitored. Then, after finishing an unannounced visit and dinner inspection one day, Nicola made an outrageous suggestion. "Hey, Mary, I've been thinking, why don't you stop locking the door?"
What?
I couldn't believe my ears. Because can you believe it? In this day and age, Nicola was suggesting we keep our house unlocked, making it accessible to anyone at any time. That's not reassuring at all. Of course, it's unwelcome. Ever since Nicola moved in, even the doorbell ringing startles me, and now there's the added possibility of Nicola slipping into our house unnoticed. Again, of course, that's unwelcome.
Given how dangerous things are these days, I guess not locking the door does feel a bit scary,
I said with a smile, trying not to offend, but Nicola frowned.
Oh. Mary, you worry too much. But it's okay. Once we get to know the neighbors better, I'll make sure they look out for us. Until then, well, Tony and I are around. We'll be popping by often,
she said, her words coming from a place of goodwill, which I appreciated. That's why I couldn't say that her frequent visits were becoming a burden. But there's only so much one can take. Last week, Nicola came over every day for 7 days. I end up having tea with Nicola at our house every day. It's no wonder frustrations arise when we're together so much. I've really come to understand that maintaining distance is crucial in the relationship between a mother-in-law and her son's wife. Nicola has been doing as she pleases, leaving unwanted plants in our yard or planting flowers without asking me. If it were once in a few months, I could tolerate it, but daily is a different story. Regarding the locking of the doors, Nicola has brought it up several times since. I've managed to convince her by emphasizing security consciousness. But then, Nicola started asking for a spare key. That's something I'll have to get Sam to refuse. There's no way I can give such a terrifying item to Nicola as she is now. Though Nicola can be difficult, I hadn't come to dislike her yet. Her meddling comes from a place of kindness. I felt more guilt about rejecting her than anything. But over time, my feelings started to change. Whether it's me who has changed, Nicola, or both, I can't say. But I began to feel discomfort and irritation at Nicola's remarks. It was a few months after Nicola and her family moved in. By then, Nicola's visits after lunch had become a routine part of our household. As for Tony, when I asked what he was up to, it seems he's usually out walking or shopping by himself. I suggested, "You could go with him." But she declined, saying, "Walking tires me out." Lately, Nicola has turned into a rather spiteful mother-in-law. When I make tea, she used to simply thank me, but now she always has a complaint: it's lukewarm or it's too weak. Whenever she opens her mouth, it's either gossip or criticism. Being with Nicola makes me feel negative. Yet, I can't just refuse her, so I nod along and force a smile. It's terrible, isn't it?
The grass in their yard has been left to grow wild. I'm almost tempted to cut it myself.
Nicola was passionately discussing a neighbor's neglected garden today.
Then I called out to them.
"Oh." She stopped talking suddenly, so I instinctively followed her gaze, which had turned towards the bookshelf. Perhaps she found a book that interested her. It would be nice if we could read together in silence. "Did you find a book that interests you?" I was about to stand up and head to the bookshelf when Nicola reached for something not on the bookshelf but on the shelf next to it.
Nicola! That's not okay.
I saw what she had taken and reached out hastily. But Nicola opened it with an unaffected expression.
"Oh my!
Just look at this, Mary."
Didn't we overspend last month? Look at this electricity bill. It's twice what we pay at our house."
Nicola was looking over our household budget book as if it were a gossip magazine.
"Please stop. Give it back,"
I said, snatching it away, and Nicola laughed.
"No need to panic. It's just that, Mary, you seem a bit bad at saving, aren't you? Poor Sam, having a wife who can't save money. You should try a little harder, okay?"
I could feel my face getting hot. The cover and spine clearly labeled it as a household budget book. Yet, the audacity to open someone else's budget book was unbelievable. And sweets, too.
I love sweets as well, so I understand, but a wife who can't save shouldn't be entitled to sweets, should she?
Nicola went on to criticize me for spending too much on groceries and unbelievable electricity bills. Then bragged about how good she is at saving. After a while, she seemed satisfied and left. After Nicola's departure, I was so frustrated that I couldn't stop crying. The stress might have been building up. I just can't take it anymore. I cried until Sam came home.
"Mom's words don't have to bother you. I know it's hard. I'm really sorry. I'll tell her not to come over anymore."
"Thanks, I appreciate it." After being comforted by Sam, I felt a bit better and decided to discuss something else. It was about the electricity bill. Just like Nicola pointed out, it was high. There hadn't been any changes, yet the bill had suddenly spiked these past few months. I was concerned, but dealing with Nicola had distracted me. Sam looked at the electricity bill and frowned.
"This is definitely strange." "Yeah, isn't it? The next bill is coming soon, right?" If it's still odd, we should contact the power company.
A few days later, a bill arrived for over $1,300, more than double the usual. We hurriedly decided to have the power company come and check. The power company employee thoroughly inspected everything. Then, we were called over to see something peculiar.
Did you know about this line?
Rushing over, the employee moved a plant nearby so we could see better. Hidden by long leaves was an external outlet we hadn't used since the house was built, having completely forgotten about it. From that outlet, as the employee had said, a wire extended towards the in-laws' house.
Do you know anything about wire?
Sam and I looked at each other, likely thinking the same thing.
Hey, Sam. This means... Yeah, no doubt. This is why our electricity bill suddenly increased.
Just to be sure, we followed the wiring with the employee. Pushing aside hedges and overgrown weeds, we found the wire indeed entered the in-laws' house shed. We couldn't see where it connected from there, but it was clear the in-laws' house was involved. The employee's expression hardened.
Should we call the police?
No, it might come to that, but let's talk first. This house belongs to our parents.
The employee, tense at first with the suspicion of electricity theft, relaxed upon learning it was a family home.
Is that so? Then I'll leave it to you.
Thank you for coming out. We really appreciate it.
We escorted the employee back to our driveway and watched him leave. After saying goodbye, we faced each other, thinking. Sam sighed deeply, holding his head.
I'm sorry for having such a mom.
Don't worry about it, or I can't really say that. What do we do now?
Tony and Nicola were probably home, as usual. Should we go talk to them now, or plan a strategy first? Sam, hand over his mouth, walked towards the external outlet left exposed after the employee moved the plant. Earlier, the staff avoided the plant, so I could clearly see the external outlet. Thinking about it, Nicola placing the plant there might have been to hide it. It felt wrong to suspect her, but it seemed the only logical explanation.
What's this connected to?
Sam then reached for the outlet and quickly pulled out the wiring.
Is it okay to pull it out? I just did. Thinking about them taking electricity from our house all this time makes me angry. Well, the employee is a witness. They can't talk their way out of this. If needed, we have that.
You're right. I nodded in agreement. That's when it happened.
Ah!
A high-pitched scream came from the in-laws' house. It must have been Nicola. Next, some hysterical mumbling, then the voice moved towards the door and headed our way. Nicola burst out of the house towards the garden with force.
Wow!
She hadn't expected anyone to be there. Seeing us, Nicola exclaimed in shock.
Oh! You scared me! What are you doing there?
She came at us aggressively, so I stood my ground and replied.
What about you, Nicola? Do you need something in our garden? You seemed quite flustered.
Well, that's... Nicola awkwardly averted her eyes. Sam, holding the unplugged wire firmly in his hands, was right there. Nicola exclaimed,
Ah!
And tried to snatch the wire from Sam's hands. Sam twisted away, hiding the wire behind his back.
What are you doing? No, that's my line.
Sam held the wire in front of Nicola's face and said in a low, serious voice.
This was plugged into our outlet.
Tom emphasized our, and Nicola glanced upwards, momentarily flustered.
So what? Do you know where this wire leads? I have no idea about that. But put it back right now. It's causing trouble over here because it's unplugged.
She demanded it should be plugged back in without knowing where it leads. And she is claiming harm from it being unplugged. That was as practically an admission of guilt. Yet, Nicola seemed unapologetically frantic. The reason for Nicola's panic was clear. I stood next to Sam, smiling brightly.
Nicola, please calm down. We can't plug in a wire when we don't know where it leads. This is our outlet, you know?
It's fine to plug it in. Just a bit won't hurt. So.
Oh. Nicola, you've always told me not to waste electricity, even a little, and that Sam is unfortunate to have a wife who can't even save on electricity.
You said that, didn't you?
Well, that's. Nicola was restless. It's too late, she murmured softly, almost panicking.
What time is it now?
It's 9:57 a.m.
It's no use now.
With that, Nicola ran off, stumbling as she went. Sam was puzzled by Nicola's bizarre behavior, but I knew the reason. I whispered to Sam. What?
So that's what it was. Maybe if we wait at home, they'll come by eventually? Sounds like it.
Sam threw the wire down, and we headed back inside. A few minutes later, there was a sound at the door, followed by the doorbell. It was Nicola. I unlocked the door and opened it.
Hello, Nicola. About earlier.
Shut up! Move!
As soon as the door opened, Nicola pushed past me, clicking her tongue as she entered. She was visibly in a bad mood. Stomping through the house like a monster, she plopped down on the sofa. Sam, already in the living room, started to speak, but Nicola beat him to it. I'm so thirsty.
What about my tea?
You're so slow.
You should move before being asked.
That's the rule, isn't it?
Yes.
And you locked the door again, didn't you?
This is why people say the son's wife in this neighborhood is so cold. As if there's anything in this house worth stealing. Pretending to be all high and mighty is just annoying.
Huh? Nicola continued to complain. I can't stand it anymore. I grabbed a half-empty plastic bottle nearby and slammed it on the table in front of Nicola. She froze, eyes wide.
Mary!
Here, water for you. And you mentioned there's nothing to steal, but unfortunately, there are greedy and dirty people out there. Like someone who would steal electricity, for example.
Nicola's face showed turmoil. I sat down next to Nicola. Despite being right beside her, Nicola wouldn't even look at me. She looked down, her face turning pale.
What's wrong, Mary? You're completely different.
Oh, Nicola. There's only so much I can take. Did you think I was some kind of saint?
I tried to lighten the mood with a joke, but Nicola looked as if she had encountered a demon rather than a deity. Nicola looked at Sam for help, but he just shook his head silently. Nicola had no allies. With an angry daughter-in-law beside her and Sam. As there was no one inclined to help nearby, Nicola's next move was predictable.
I'm sorry. I just remembered something. I have to go now.
You're not going anywhere.
I pressed down on Nicola's shoulder as she tried to stand up from the sofa. Nicola's rear sank back into the sofa.
Mary! Really today?
You were the one who said you were thirsty, weren't you, Nicola? Surely you're not saying you can't drink my water? After making such a fuss, that wouldn't make sense, would it?
Nicola, with tears in her eyes, reached for the plastic bottle but was stopped by Sam. Nicola looked relieved, but I didn't actually want to make her drink the leftover water. The real issue was yet to be addressed.
When did you start stealing our electricity? Stealing? What an awful thing to say! But the fact is, the wiring plugged into our outlet was leading to your house, wasn't it?
Nicola tried to speak several times, searching for an excuse, but couldn't find any that would work. There was no way to talk her way out of this situation. All that was left was for Nicola to admit and apologize. I thought that was going to happen, but it seemed luck smiled on Nicola for a moment. The doorbell rang, and when I checked, Tony was there.
Is Nicola here?
It seemed Tony had gone out for a bit and came back to find the door unlocked, the TV on, but Nicola missing, so he was worried.
Tony!
Nicola cried for help as if reinforcements had arrived. Tony was confused by Nicola's unusual state. Then, Sam explained everything from the beginning. After thinking for a moment, Tony slowly said,
"Isn't there some mistake here?"
It's hard to believe at first that his wife was secretly stealing electricity from his son and daughter-in-law's home.
So, who did the wiring? Do you expect me to believe a stranger came and connected our houses?
Tony crossed his arms and pondered again. Then he agreed.
Well, we should probably go and see it.
And stood up.
But
Nicola tried to stop him, flustered, but Tony asked Sam to show him to the outlet. The wire ran into a shed where it wasn't visible. After checking, Tony came back pale-faced. And immediately made Nicola apologize. "I'm sorry. Truly, I am." Nicola silently looked down. Like a child. According to Tony, the wiring was connected via an extension cord to a battery and Nicola's computer. The battery was bought when they moved in. She was advised to charge it during cheaper, nighttime rates, and using it during the day was cost-effective. Nicola had been doing exactly that. Initially, it was just that, but then she started plugging in her computer and other appliances since there were free sockets on the extension cord. Eventually, she used our electricity day and night. Nicola justified her actions by saying it was more cost-effective. It was infuriating enough that she had been stealing electricity. But even more so that she had looked down on me while lying all along.
You've been saying how pitiful Sam is for having a wife who can't save, or criticizing me for buying sweets while being unable to save. Remember?
That's the truth, though. Her lack of remorse was almost impressive.
Saving by using someone else's electricity isn't saving. It's just a crime.
I continued.
And don't think we'll just let this go because we're family. If you sincerely apologize, that's one thing. But if you keep this attitude, we'll have to involve the police.
Nicola looked surprised. As if she thought getting caught would be the end of it.
What kind of daughter-in-law are you? To betray your own family.
Don't talk like that. We just want you to make amends because we are family.
As I reached for my phone, Nicola panicked and lunged at me. Sam quickly restrained her.
There's no evidence. With everything laid out like this, you still need evidence? Let me tell you something conclusive.
I pointed towards the roof. Nicola squinted. Then realized. Yes, our house is equipped with security cameras, which happened to cover the area around the outlet. Nicola murmured a small, "Ah."
Is this enough for you? And one more thing.
There's more? The reason you were in such a hurry today was because of the release of limited edition sweets, wasn't it?
No way. I smiled. Yes. I had a friend get them for me, so I managed to secure them. If you hadn't been busy stealing electricity, you might have been able to get them on your computer, too. Too bad. Nicola trembled and then sat down on the spot. After discussing with Sam, we decided against reporting Nicola to the police. She had admitted to it, and we had evidence, but it was too much hassle, and being family, it might get brushed off. Instead, we decided to get a proper apology and compensation for the electricity from Tony and Nicola. It was awkward living so close, but it had to be done. Tony and Nicola, perhaps feeling awkward too, eventually moved back to their old house. Apparently, word got out about the electricity theft, and Nicola became the subject of rumors. Nicola was devastated and wanted to return to their original home. It turns out Nicola thought she was good at neighborhood relations. But in reality, people were just being polite. After paying us, Tony and Nicola were left with little money. But we would not help them. They needed to save on their own, especially on their beloved sweets. As for me, now that Nicola is gone, I'm enjoying my life, deciding which sweets to buy next with the electricity bill back to normal.